Good morning. It is 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. I'm Jose Diaz-Balart. We begin this hour with breaking news out of the Middle East. Any moment, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to deliver his final address before leaving office next Monday. This comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there is a, quote, last-minute crisis holding up to a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Meanwhile, in Khan Yunis, there were celebrations in the streets to the announcement. The war began more than 15 months ago when Hamas launched a surprise attack, a massacre, killing 1,200 men, women, and children in Israel and taking 250 people hostage. Over 15 months, more than 46,000 people have died, according to the Hamas-run Ministry of Health in Gaza. Now, this deal includes 3 phases, beginning with a 42-day ceasefire, followed by the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Among those expected to be released are first 2 American hostages. This morning, White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby addressed the latest obstacle.
We're confident that we'll be able to solve these last-minute issues and get it moving, and that this ceasefire can take place starting on Sunday.
Joining us now, NBC's Danielle Hamamjian. From Tel Aviv, Ambassador Alon Pincus, former Israeli Consul General in New York. Miri Eisen, Senior Fellow at Reichman University's International Institute for Counterterrorism and former Israeli government spokesperson and a retired FBI colonel. And Major John Spencer, Chair of Urban Warfare Studies at West Point's Modern War Institute and a retired Army officer. So, Danielle, what's the latest on this latest hurdle?
Well, the Israeli government hasn't clarified or provided any clarification on what exactly this issue is, but a senior Israeli government official tells me that among the new demands made by Hamas, the issue of the prisoners, the Palestinian prisoners. And as you mentioned, there will be many Palestinians released in exchange for the hostages. It's in the hundreds, possibly way over 1,000. There will be women and children who've been arrested in the past year. I should point out, Jose, that since October 7th, thousands of Palestinians in the West Bank have been arrested, many of them held in what's called administrative detention, which means they haven't been tried and they haven't been charged. But among those expected to be released are more high-profile Palestinian detainees, and I think the issue here is there are some high-profile ones who Israel would describe as having blood on their hands. They're serving multiple life sentences. Hamas has committed to releasing some of them, but Israel wants veto. So I think that could be one of the issues. I'm here at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, where, as you can see, it's not very crowded. Among the people I've spoken to, there is disappointment, but no surprise at the delay today. I was here again last night. I was in front of the Defense Ministry where protesters were, there was relief, yes, that there is a ceasefire, but there is a lot of anger knowing that this deal was on the table back in May. How many people have been killed since? Palestinian civilians, IDF soldiers, hostages. And so there's a lot of anger directed at the Israeli government, specifically at the far-right minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, who admitted in the past 48 hours having blocked previous hostage deals in the past and hoped and said publicly he hopes to do so once again. So lots of questions being asked today. Who exactly is behind this delay? Obviously, Israel saying it's Hamas, Hamas saying we're committed to the agreement. This has been the soundtrack to these negotiations since May, both sides accusing each other of being the main obstacle.
So Danielle, do we know how that proposal, which has been on the table, as you say, since May, essentially, is now coming to possible fruition?
So there's broad agreement on stage 1, which you briefly mentioned before, is going to last 42 days, during which period we'll see 33 hostages released. They include women, children, civilians over the age of 50, as well as those who are wounded and injured. In exchange, we'll see Palestinians released 30 Palestinians for every civilian, 50 Palestinians for every female soldier, that is. And one senior Israeli official told me that they know that there is a price to pay for the female soldiers, and they are willing to pay it. Now, during this period, there'll be a gradual withdrawal of IDF forces from densely populated areas. They'll also withdraw from what's called the Netzarim corridor, which is this highway that cuts the Gaza Strip in half, north and south, and hundreds of thousands of Gazans will be able to return to northern Gaza. And critically, there will be more aid allowed into the Strip, hundreds of trucks carrying badly needed humanitarian aid and food and medicine. Jose?
Danielle Hamamdjian in Tel Aviv, thank you so very much. So, Ambassador, what do you think is holding up this part of a process that seemed to be just a couple of hours ago as going through?
Well, there's a substantive element to it. There could possibly be a problem with the names of the Palestinians to be released that Israel has not given prior consent to. But I think that most of it, Jose, is grandstanding, political grandstanding by Mr. Netanyahu. He needs to placate his right-wing coalition. He's primarily anxious about the so-called second phase, the Israeli withdrawal in the first phase, and the second phase that called for a permanent ceasefire, something that President Biden stated yesterday in his address, in his speech. And while trying to placate his right-wing coalition and convince them that don't worry about it, don't over-dramatize everything, the ceasefire will probably not hold, they seem not to believe him, and they probably know why. On the other hand, he can't tell them one thing and then tell the incoming president, President-elect Donald Trump, another. And if he is perceived, if he's perceived by President Trump as reneging on the deal or introducing last-minute derailing demands, there's, excuse the cliche, there's hell to be paid.
Ambassador, how much do you think President-elect Trump is figuring in this?
Very prominently when it came to the agreement itself. Look, this agreement, and Danielle mentioned that accurately, this agreement was on the table in March, but as a full plan, it was presented by President Biden in late May, and then even got the validation or the cover of a UN Security Council on the 31st of May, 2024, and Israel did not agree. It was then reintroduced or offered in July and in August, but at that point, Mr. Netanyahu was intent on prolonging the war for his own political reasons, using the eradicating, annihilating, obliterating Hamas and striving for total victory as his explanations. Valid or not, I leave it to you or to our viewers. Now, once President Trump was elected in November, Netanyahu had a deadline because Trump 3 times said, I want this over with, I want this wrapped up, I don't want to deal with this, this needs to be done. He said this 3 times between November and early January. So Netanyahu knew he had the 20th of January as a deadline. Ergo, the convergence of the agreement, which again is identical to the May agreement, and who knows how many lives on both sides could have been spared and saved. So in that respect, while the heavy lifting of the negotiations was done by the Biden administration via Qatar and to a lesser extent Egypt, the introduction of Trump's intimidation and in the form of pressure was a game changer, I think.
And Miri, how do you see, Colonel, how do you see this deal, and how fragile do you think it is?
I think it's fragile, but here we are, both Alon and myself, in Israel, Israeli, and I differ a bit on what Alon was presenting before. I'm kind of wondering if it's the difference between diplomats and military people, because the devil is in the details, and we have said that over the last 24 hours. I have said this over the last 467 days. When you do a deal with the Hamas terror organization, Jose, until now, it's as if we're not mentioning that. It's as if this war, you mentioned it at the beginning of the program, this war was started by Hamas. They took the hostages in last year, and I do not support the Israeli government, but last year, even both Blinken, John Kirby all said that the reason we didn't arrive at a deal is Hamas, not only Israel. And so, yes, I can push back at my government, but as I look at it right now, Hamas is at this stage along the way interested in an agreement. That means that we have done something to it. Sadly, militarily, we have also killed a lot of people inside the Gaza Strip, but we have changed Hamas. And right now, the devil in the details has to do with how do you do the exchange? Here we are 467, 68 days later. We still don't really know in the people that were taken as hostages on October 7th. We don't know who's alive, who's dead. What is Hamas going to play with that? There's the other side of Israel having to let out people. I'll give you one example, Jose, that to me is part of the devil in the details. I have a good friend, and she was attacked by terrorists, and those terrorists were caught, put on trial, put on jail in Israel for terrorism. They killed a friend that had been with her. They left her for dead, and they are on the list to be left out. How do you think that's going to feel? And this isn't about right and left inside Israel. It's also about the terror victims in Israel before October 7th. And you're going to see on the list of people that Hamas want to have let out of those prisoners inside Israeli prisons, you're going to see names like that. I say for myself as a mother, I'm the mother of 3 kids. And if I had kids right now and I had a boy and a girl that were in the military and they were hostages, so if I have a girl, she'd be let out on the first stage. But if you have a boy not being left out, think of what that does also domestically for us. This is part of Hamas's terrible, from my point of view, the psychological terror of making us anxious and unhappy. There's no sense right now yet of relief. And that devil in the details means somebody has to go in, bring out the people, meet them. Hamas is still holding that. Hamas in the last 24 hours have come out again in their masks, in their uniforms, showing it off again. And I say all of that, there's no winners in this war. A war is a horrible thing. And here we are towards the end. We have to get the hostages back. This is the commitment of the state of Israel, including this prime minister, with all of my extreme criticism against him. And we need to get past the stage. Please, sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think we just want to go to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is just starting to speak. Let's go to that right now.
Less gray hair, as my daughter likes to point out. I spoke about how the work that we do to keep the American people and the world informed through you, with you, could not be more important. Most of us have traveled well more than 1 million miles now together. We've done it with a remarkable press corps, people that I've gotten to know as colleagues. If I said friends, that might actually create problems for you, but let me simply say how much I appreciate the partnership, the professionalism, the work that we've done. I have even greater respect, even greater appreciation for you asking the tough questions, for you holding us to account, being on the receiving end. Sometimes that's not always the most comfortable thing, not always the most enjoyable thing, but it is the most necessary thing in our democracy.
Reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal?
I'm happy to address questions.
We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing.
I'm happy to address questions when we get a chance. Thank you.
Based order on the mantle of your tradition to Zionism. Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you?
I'm happy to address your questions when we get to questions. Thank you. Thank you.
You helped destroy our religion and Judaism by associating.
Yeah, I have a statement to make. Thank you.
You waved the white flag before Netanyahu. You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
I look forward to taking questions when I get a chance to finish my statement. Thank you.
Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirk through the whole thing every day. You smirk through the genocide.
Thank you. And thank you, Matt. Now, I've got a few more things to say, and I'm happy to take any question about anything, as we've done.
For those who missed it, the reporter said, your grandfather was an Israeli lobbyist.
These past 4 years. And indeed, I'll talk a little bit about the developments the last few days as well. But I first really wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you. And also thank you to,
Maybe not everyone.
well, okay, there's an asterisk, and yes, thank you, Matt Lee. But also to a remarkable press team here, led by Matt Miller, who do the work every day of trying to make sure that you're informed, the American people are informed. Let me also just take a step back before diving into the developments of this week, these last days, just to consider how far we've come over these past 4 years, and also to think a little bit about where we might be going from here. When President Biden took office, the United States faced the worst public health crisis in more than a century. It faced the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and unprecedented breaches with allies and partners around the world. Our adversaries saw a historic opportunity to work together to challenge our interests, to challenge our global standing, to challenge the international system of rules and principles on which our security and prosperity depend. First time I had an opportunity to speak at length in this role, I laid out how we would work to leverage American diplomacy to safeguard and accelerate America's renewal, how we would reimagine and revitalize our greatest strategic asset, our unmatched network of allies and partners, to deliver on issues that actually matter in the lives of our fellow citizens, matter in their livelihoods, matter in their futures, and to defend against increasingly assertive and aggressive revisionist authoritarian powers. And also, how we modernize our own diplomacy to try to deliver on these priorities, to ensure that this department is ready to meet the tests of a more contested, a more complicated, a more combustible world. As President Biden emphasized when he was here on Monday, thanks to historic investments at home and around the world, the United States can now operate from a position of greater strength to tackle all of these challenges. Our adversaries and competitors are weaker. Our strategy of renewal has set the stage for America to win the fierce competition, to shape a new era of international affairs to the benefit of our people, the benefit of people around the world. And I think this week was another reminder, both of the power and the purpose of American leadership and American diplomacy. Over 15 months of devastating conflict between Israel and Hamas, we've worked to broker a deal that would bring hostages home, that would stop the fighting, that would surge humanitarian aid to people who so desperately need it, that would create the space to conclude a permanent ceasefire. We now have that, and we expect implementation of the agreement to begin on Sunday. As President Biden said yesterday, after more than 400 days of struggle, a day of success has arrived. I want to thank our fellow mediators, Qatar and Egypt, for their extraordinary partnership. And I want to thank my colleagues, in particular, Jake Sullivan, Bill Burns, Brett McGurk, for their remarkable skill, tireless dedication over these many months of negotiation.
Will you recognize the Geneva Conventions apply to the Palestinians?
And again, I'm happy to address questions when we have a chance. I'm happy to address questions in a moment. Thank you. This is a moment of tremendous relief for Israelis and Palestinians alike. The daughter of one hostage spoke for many when she said, "I can't wait to see them come back to their families. I'm so desperate to see them." A mother of 5 displaced from Gaza City said simply, "We are being reborn." It's also a moment of historic possibility for the region and well beyond. It's going to take tremendous effort, political courage, compromise to realize that possibility, to try to ensure that the gains that have been achieved over the past 15 months at enormous, excruciating cost are actually enduring, to manage the still profound.
What fucking gains? What fucking gains? You made no fucking gains. Israel lost at every fucking turn.
Risks to deliver on the promise of a more integrated Middle East. And simply put, to forge this reality, there are 2 immediate imperatives. First, to fully implement the ceasefire deal. And then second, to finalize a plan, an effective plan, as I spelled out earlier this week, that provides for Gaza's transitional governance, its security, its reconstruction, and that can make the halt in fighting endure. Delivering on these 2 priorities will in turn create the conditions for Israel and Saudi Arabia to normalize relations between them, which will require a credible pathway to a Palestinian state. On each of these imperatives, we've delivered concrete progress and we've laid a foundation for success, which we will hand over to the incoming administration.
Why are you talking about a need for a Palestinian state when your boss, Joe Biden, consistently voted against a Palestinian state his entire fucking administration? And you backed it, asshole.
Together, they represent a historic opportunity to advance the long-term interests of the United States, our partners in the region, and around the Middle East. In Ukraine as well, we've seen the results of steadfast American leadership. We rallied and kept together some 50 countries to help Ukraine defend itself from Putin's war of aggression. Through Ukrainian courage and also Western resolve and firepower, Ukraine repelled Russia's invasion and took back half the territory it originally seized.
That's a
With
lie.
martial commitments from countries around the world that will help Ukraine deter and defend against future attacks and stand on its own feet militarily, economically, democratically. We've also imposed the most ambitious sanctions and export controls ever on Russia, cutting off its biggest banks, reducing dramatically Europe's reliance on Russian energy, oil and gas, almost to zero at this point. As a result of some of our latest sanctions, Russian oil tankers are piling up along the Chinese coast, unable to offload. Ukraine will continue to stand as an independent,
You're a serial
democratic
liar.
nation anchored in the West with the freedom to choose its own future. If we sustain our support for Ukraine, if we continue to exacerbate Putin's growing manpower and economic dilemmas, we can continue to help Ukrainians gain leverage to negotiate a just and secure peace.
Bullshit.
Now, I got back from what was my 21st trip to the Indo-Pacific in this job just a short while ago, a region where the United States is now competing from a position of strength. We brought our regional allies together, our partners together, around a shared vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific, where goods and ideas and people flow freely, where rules are applied fairly and transparently, where countries are free to choose both their own path and their own partners. We enhance bilateral relationships with our core treaty allies, with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines. We forged a new era of trilateral cooperation with Japan and Korea, with Japan and the Philippines as well. We re-energized the Quad with Japan, India, Australia, strengthened our relationships with ASEAN, the Pacific Island countries, elevated partnerships with Vietnam and Indonesia. As the DPRK and the PRC continue to fuel Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine, underscoring how European and Asian security are indivisible, we've also built enduring bridges between our Pacific and Atlantic allies and partners. Australia, Japan, and South Korea have provided important support to Ukraine. In 2021, European allies were on the verge of signing a massive trade agreement with China. Now they're coordinating.
As we continue to listen in on Secretary of State Antony Blinken, we will, of course, continue listening in and bring more of his comments to you in just a second. But I want to right now talk a little bit on the human aspect of what may or may not be happening right now in the Middle East. And I'm talking about the fact that the Biden administration says the first phase of this deal would include the release of two Americans, Sagi Dekel Chen and Keith Siegel. Sagi Dekel Chen was taken from a kibbutz near the Gaza border while trying to protect his family on the 7th of October. He has 3 children, one of whom was born after he was captured. And with us now from Israel, Sagi's father, Jonathan Dekel Chen. Jonathan, I thank you for being with us this morning. I'm just wondering how you and your family are doing. And as we wait these eternal minutes to find out what is going to be happening there, how are you and your family doing?
Well, we simply keep doing the work on behalf of Sagi, but another 28 hostages from our kibbutz that still are in captivity, and all of the 98. That includes appealing to the outgoing administration, the Biden administration, the incoming Trump administration, to keep pressure on all of the parties and not allow Hamas or Israel, for that matter, the Israeli government, to sort of slip through the cracks here and really hammer it home, make this happen for the good of the hostages, the good of Israel, but also for the good of 2 million Palestinians in Gaza who need this madness to stop.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, I know that you've been told that your son could be among the first hostages released as part of this agreement. What have you been told about your son and his condition?
Well, before that, I think just as a clarification, I've certainly heard press reports about the sequencing, but our family has not received any official confirmation from the U.S. administration or from the Israeli government about any of this. So I really can't say very much in those terms. Honestly, like the rest of the hostages, we really don't know what Sagi's condition is. And your viewers may or may not understand that Hamas has never allowed the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, or any other international organization to visit with any of the hostages. So the last positive proof of life we had was from over a year ago. At that time, we knew from hostages who had been released, women and children who were released in the first successful negotiation. A number of them had seen Sagi in the tunnels under Gaza just before they were released. They were able to tell us that he was alive and wounded. But at that time, they also told us about other men from our kibbutz that they had been with in the tunnels for months. And we now know that many of those men were subsequently murdered by Hamas. So at this moment, we really don't know the fate of pretty much any of the hostages.
You know, it's been 468 days since the October 7th massacre. More than 1,200 Israelis, men, women, children, killed, massacred, more than 250 people taken hostage, including your son. How do you go forward day by day? What keeps you and your family going? Where's the light? Where do you find the light?
I'm not sure there is very much light right now. The light will return when the hostages come home. But what keeps me going is an image that I've had in my mind since October 8th, which is Sagi entering some room or a hallway somewhere. I hope and pray on his own 2 feet. And his 3 little girls now, one of whom he's never met, run and leap into his arms. And he's then able to embrace his beautiful wife. And we will not stop until that vision comes true for us, for other hostage families, and also for those many, many hostage families whose loved ones have been murdered already, but to bring them home for a burial amongst their loved ones.
You know, I guess there are some who may have forgotten what happened on the 7th of October, others who conveniently play as if they've forgotten about it, the death, the pain, the suffering, and certainly the pain and death and suffering that has happened since that massacre. What do you want all of us to know?
Well, look, it clearly, the series of events, the tragic series of events since October 7th was set off by an unprecedented, savage attack by Hamas and Islamic Jihad on Israel, on our civilian communities. In my community alone, of a little over 400 people, 59 were murdered that day, 79 were taken hostage, multiple rapes and complete destruction of our civilian community. Now, that's enough to sort of occupy one's mind for quite some time, but I think the challenge for all of us, and I say this to Israeli audiences as well, is not to descend into that endless cycle of hatred which got us here. Without right now affixing blame, for how we got here over these 100 years of conflict between Arabs and Jews in the Holy Land, that would be victory for Hamas. If what has happened over the last year and 3 months, it just institutionalizes the hatred. So I hope and pray for my grandchildren and the grandchildren of my neighbors across the border, even those who came to murder and loot our home, that they somehow can grow into a better future. But believe it or not, that's all predicated in getting our hostages home, which will allow then for the ceasefire to come into effect and somehow begin rebuilding all of our lives in the region.
Jonathan, you were saying that, it's very difficult to find any light as of right now. Do you find any hope? Do you have any hope? What does hope look like for you?
Right now, I have very, very limited needs, very limited goals. It's to get Sagi home, to get another 28 members of my extended kibbutz family home, and to reunite people in Israel, of the 98 still remaining hostages. Beyond that, I pray that by virtue of having completed this agreement on the Israeli side, that we can somehow begin to heal our society, which came into this war just before the massacre, very, very divided. And the only way, even now, a year and 3 months after this war began, the only way it can even begin to start coming back together as a coherent society with any measure of solidarity, and the hostages have to come home. And that has to precede and just be prioritized by our government, but we also need the help of our friends in the States. For now, both the Biden and Trump administrations working hand in hand, but as of Monday, the Trump administration to continue to pressure as much as necessary both sides in this conflict, including the intermediaries. We have faith. And we've seen the energy emanating from the Trump team that has brought us to this brink of peace and hostage return, but we need them to bring it home as well.
Jonathan, let's continue our conversation. I hope that we have a conversation where we have some great news to share and maybe some celebrations to carry out within the framework of what is so much death and suffering, and just talking about your 400 extended family of the kibbutz, 59 murdered that day. But hopefully, let's continue and let's find hope and let's find light going forward. I hope we can continue our conversation going forward, and the next couple of days, our conversation will have some good news. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. From your lips to God's ears. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go back to Washington. Secretary of Antony Blinken is now taking questions during his final news conference.
And the question is whether leaders on all sides, but the people behind them, will find a way to seize on those opportunities. So, as I laid out in some detail just the other day, when we took office, we were very focused on pursuing greater integration in the region as the real answer to creating more security, more peace, more opportunity for people. Not trying to change individual countries, governments, societies, but bringing them closer together. And before October 7th, we've done a lot of work on this integration, building on the Abraham Accords of the first Trump administration, pointing toward the normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And as you all know, we were all planning to go to Saudi Arabia and Israel because we've made so much progress on the normalization accords on October 10th, a trip that of course didn't happen, to do two things: to try to help finalize agreements that were necessary to get to normalization, and as part of that, to find a clear way forward, a pathway to a Palestinian state, vital to Saudi Arabia, very important to us as well. Even with everything that's happened since October 7th, I believe strongly, including from my many conversations with leaders in the region, whether it's in Israel, in Saudi Arabia, or beyond, that the desire to pursue integration, the desire to bring countries together, remains strong, remains powerful, and can be a driving force for finally resolving some of these other questions, including the Palestinian question. Israel's deepest desire from day one of its founding was to be treated like any other country in the region, to have normal relations. And it's been demonstrated that that's possible and desired, but it requires, among other things, ending the conflict in Gaza, which we are now on the verge of doing as a result of everything that we have put into this. An agreement that President Biden put forward before the world in May, got the entire world to endorse. And in the months since, we've been working to negotiate the final details and get it implemented, and that's where we are now. So, end Gaza is one, and then yes, a credible pathway to a Palestinian state is two, and leaders will have to summon the vision and the courage to do that. I laid out some ideas for how you can get there just the other day, but I believe that is possible. I believe the driving desire for integration is something that can carry this forward. Finally, I'll say this. We've also seen, as a result of so much of the work that we've done, what the possibilities are. For Israel, when it was attacked in an unprecedented way by Iran, a direct attack with hundreds of missiles, hundreds of drones. Not only did we come to Israel's active defense for the first time ever, we brought other countries along to do that, including countries in the region. And Israel now sees powerfully what it stands to gain from greater integration in the region, including in a common security architecture. All can see that this is a way to effectively isolate the troublemaker in the region, Iran. So all of that is there, all of that is possible, and I think for the incoming administration, it'll be important to continue to show, here's one path, and what can be achieved by following that path. And then there's another, which is perpetual violence, destruction, terrorism, despair for people. That's the choice. I think we've now put in place and done the work that handing it off can be used to build a strong foundation and move down that much more positive path.
Leon. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your service. Thank you for doing this. I trust you're not going to miss the million miles that you've done in the last 4 years, and that you're happy to finally see your children. I wanted to ask you on Gaza, of course. You mentioned tremendous relief in the region, both the Palestinians and Israel. There seems to be uncertainty for the ceasefire, and basically it was announced yesterday, and it's supposed to be implemented on Sunday. That's 4 days, quite a long time. Israel has been led new strikes on Gaza today or overnight. How confident are you that this ceasefire is actually going to happen? And if I may, just a broader question, after the 4 years, or your 4 years, and now that your tenure is coming up, what is your proudest accomplishment in these 4 years, and what is your biggest disappointment?
So on the ceasefire, yes, I am confident, and I fully expect that implementation will begin, as we said, on Sunday. Look, it's not exactly surprising that in a process, in a negotiation that has been this challenging and this fraught, you may get a loose end. We're tying up that loose end as we speak. I've been on the phone in one way or another all morning with Brett McGurk, with our Qatari friends, and I'm very confident that this is moving forward, and we'll see the start of implementation of the agreement on Sunday. In terms of my own tenure and what I take from it, and I think there'll be plenty of opportunity to reflect on that in the weeks and months ahead. Look, in terms of satisfaction, as I said at the outset, we came in knowing that we had to reset the foundation for American diplomacy and American foreign policy. And resetting that foundation meant, as I said, re-engaging, rejuvenating, reimagining these alliances and partnerships. It's the greatest strength that we bring to virtually every issue we have to tackle around the world. These voluntary partnerships and alliances that have stood us in such good stead over so many years, and I think are vital to effectively operating in this more complicated, this more contested, this more combustible world. And that's exactly what we did. But the point is not doing that for the sake of doing it. The point is doing it for the sake of more effectively dealing with the world we're operating in, and I think we've demonstrated that. When Ukraine was attacked by Russia, because of the investments that we've made in our partnerships and our alliances, we were able to bring together 50 countries, keep them together, and marshal their focus and their resources on helping to defend Ukraine. And we've done that very successfully. And we've done that in a way where many other countries picked up the burden. When it comes to maybe the biggest systemic challenge that we face in the international system, and that is China and the capacity that it has, uniquely, whether it's militarily, whether it's economically, whether it's diplomatically, to reshape the international order. What we've been able to do through these stronger alliances and partnerships is to focus other countries in ways that we haven't seen before on how to deal effectively with the challenge.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken pretty much giving a wrap up of his time as Secretary of State. I want to bring in Major John Spencer, Chair of Urban Warfare Studies at West Point's Modern War Institute and a retired Army officer. And we were talking right before the press conference began. Major, but I just want your thoughts on what the Secretary of State just said is still confidence that the implementation of this agreement will occur starting Sunday. What's your confidence and your reaction to what we've heard?
I believe that the first phase of the deal will go through. I mean, I believe not only is the devil in the detail, but this is a deal with the devil, but Israel and even your previous guest, a hostage family, is willing to do that. I mean, people forget what we're talking about here. Hamas took a 9-month-old baby, and Israel is willing to exchange hundreds of convicted terrorists who are serving life sentences for the body, hopefully a living baby.
You're a liar!
Detail. But for
you lying son of a bitch!
One of the details that also is discussed is we're not talking, what is Hamas saying about this deal? The billionaire negotiator, the head of Hamas's political wing in Qatar, did a press conference after the deal was supposedly agreed to and said, not only do we celebrate October 7th, we're going to do it again. So for Blinken and for others, to include Israelis who want peace, the biggest obstacle to that is Hamas. So the detail of the full ceasefire agreement is that phase 1 to phase 2, where both the Israelis, Blinken, the entire Biden administration, the incoming Trump administration says that Hamas will have no role in Gaza after the peace deal. So, application here, the greatest hurdle to peace, even the Palestinian people in Gaza, is Hamas. And we can't forget what happened to the hostages that were released. Many of them,
indeed. I'm sorry, Major. I appreciate you being with us, and I apologize for bringing you in and bringing you out when we had this breaking news of the press conference. I thank you very much for being with us. Let's see, then, that first phase that you're talking about, which seems to be the easiest phase to implement. Well, there's some stumbling blocks just for that, and let's hope that they're solved soon. Major John Spencer, I thank you very much for being with us today.
Get the fuck
Up
out
next,
of here.
breaking